We've got Travis Reier back from BamaOnline. All things Crimson Tide, and definitely want to reach out to you about Miami's new transfer. Jamil Burrows here, defensive tackle, listed at 6'3", 309 pounds. We're going to get into his background, obviously his incident over the summer. But let's just start off. CHP, can he play? Just your thoughts on his ability.
Yeah, we saw flashes of some potential, no doubt about it, from Jamil during his time at Alabama. You even go back, I think, to that 2020 COVID season. We saw him as a rotational piece against Georgia in Tuscaloosa. So at that point, you're thinking, wow, this is a guy very much in the plans for the future. But it just seemed like whenever you thought Jamil was starting to gain traction at Alabama, then we would go these extended stretches without seeing him. So you were left to wonder exactly about his development. But again, there were instances where you thought, yeah, this can definitely be a guy that by the Alabama standard can compete and can contribute at a place like Alabama.
So last season, we could talk about that. He played 3 years at Alabama. He transfers to Miami. He transferred after the transfer portal window. Miami's not expecting him to play this year. So from Miami's standpoint, it's a 2024 and beyond. He will have 3 years of eligibility if you count the red shirt from 21. The 20 COVID season did play last year. So if they want to bring him back, 2 years of eligibility, because this year won't count towards that, or it will count, but he'll have 2 after this. Anyways, Travis, looking back to last year, he did play a career high 161 snaps, played about 250 in his career there. Mississippi State game, he played the career high or the season high, the 39 there. What do you make of last year? You touched on him being a rotational piece, but what do you make of his season last year?
Yeah, I think Jamil in a season where they really needed some playmakers to step forward because they had moved through Christian Barmore and they had moved through Fedarian Mathis. They needed another interior type that could get after the quarterback, provide some pass rush for some tackle for loss production. So the opportunity was there for him. Now it ended up being more, I think, of Byron Young who assumed that role, but they were far from prolific in terms of playmaking ability along the defensive front. They were far removed from Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen and some of those guys, Quinnen Williams, that they've had, like Miami's had with defensive linemen in the past that have gone through that program. They just didn't have it. So you would have liked to have seen him capitalize more on the opportunities that he had a season ago. But even going into the spring of 2023, going back to the A-Day game in April, he figured to be very much in this mix. They returned guys like Jaheim Otis, is going to be outstanding as a sophomore. They've got some other guys that are emerging like Tim Keenan, but he was still in the mix to be a top 3 guy on the interior. Now I think he's a little bit of a tweener. It just depends on the front you play him in. I think he can be a 3 tech in a 4-3 defense. In Alabama's way of doing things, he fit well because you could stretch him to the 5 technique at end in a 3-4, but they played so little base now. It was so much nickel that you saw him more as a 2 tech in their essentially a 4-man front in their nickel. So base, big nickel, and pass rush. I think he can give some of all those things. It's just reaching a level of consistency and trust from a coaching staff that's going to kind of put him in position to do so.
Travis, can you stay more on what Alabama expects from a guy at his position, listed at that nose guard spot, as you touched on some base 3-4 stuff that they do, but they do mix things up a little bit. Can you maybe explain a little bit more, as you did right there, essentially what Alabama expects from a guy like Jamil with his size and ability, and maybe different ways they can use him, as you just touched on a little bit there. Can you expand on that a little bit for people that haven't seen maybe enough of Alabama's defense?
Yeah, Jamil at first sight, when you first saw him at Alabama, you thought this is more of a classic nose tackle type. It might be a guy that's limited to the base defense at nose, and maybe as you get into the big nickel, you keep him in there in 5 defensive backs when it's maybe a run situation. But I thought he showed you that, again, they used him at end too in some of their looks as recent as March and April in spring practice. So he offers positional versatility. I think you can play him some on the nose if that's what you want to do. I think in your dime packages, he was a guy at Alabama that they were strongly considering when they went with 6 defensive backs, and their pass rush looks putting him over the center and utilizing him there as almost a solo true defensive lineman on the field. And then everyone else is more of like an edge rusher or a linebacker type. So I think he does give you that. It's not just value as it relates to his position in general. I think in how you can move him across the front, package to package, is something Alabama certainly planned to do with him, or I tried to do with him. And I would be surprised if that's not the case with Miami too.
And from a Miami standpoint, certainly we're still learning everything about Lance Guidry's new defense. But one thing he talks about is some of the things that you're talking about here, Travis, with Jamil, just they like to be able to rotate different things, show different looks. Guidry's been known to do that. Certainly we'll be able to see mostly everything on Friday night when they open against the Miami Redhawks, but certainly the big game against Texas A&M the following week. But just hearing those kind of things and with knowing what Guidry wants to do without actually seeing it in games at Miami, certainly this seems like a fit. And if you're looking from a Miami standpoint next year, what it looks like at defensive tackle along the defensive line, they need pieces. They've not been able to strike big with recruits. They do like what they have in Joshua Horton, but also they're expected to lose Leonard Taylor to the draft. Branson Dean will graduate. They do have Anthony Campbell expected back next year, depth guy, but they need guys. And simply put, and that's why Miami made this move to try to get somebody. They've been trying to get somebody, either recruiting or the portal. You touched on his flashes. Essentially, again, this happens a lot with defensive tackles. The statistical stuff doesn't jump out at you all the time, especially for a rotational guy. So this is a guy with 15 credited tackles in 20 games over his career. But when it's going well for him, what does it look like? What are the flashes that you're seeing with him, essentially, when it is all put together, when he is on top of his game?
Yeah, I think lateral movement that belies his body type. I mean, just being honest, when you look at Jamil, you don't think twitch. You don't think agility as much. You think more of maybe this guy's a gapper, a two gap nose tackle, but he does offer some of those attributes athletically. And I think it's more intangibly with Jamil where you hope the strides start to really show up. And that's in the way of just maturity. I think if this guy is fully engaged and committed, and perhaps the change of scenery will be a good thing for him, there's still plenty of upside to Jamil Burrows in terms of being a high level defensive lineman at a place like Miami. I don't have any doubt about that part. It's intangibly, can this Miami staff, can he connect in a way that seemed somewhat elusive to him at Alabama?
You touched on intangibles, so that jumps right into some tangible things that we heard about this summer, incidents that he had. Look, this is a guy kind of going back, I haven't touched on this. 2020, he was a 4-star recruit according to 24/7 Sports composite rankings out of McEachern there in Georgia. The tangible incident this summer, we heard about, I've read about it. What can you say about this? Because certainly this is part of his story. This is part of him and what he went through and where his future lied at Alabama. He entered the portal in June there. What can you say about it? What can you report on what happened this summer with this incident?
Yeah, as far as specifics, I think a lot of what is true and maybe isn't has been out there for a while. Especially right on the heels of the situation. I would just say it's unfortunate on both sides because Alabama had invested heavily into his development. And from his side of things, he looked like he was very much on the doorstep of being more of a consistent, prominent piece to that defensive line. So it was a loss, I would say, for both sides. Alabama's going to be fine, I think, because they have some solid options. They don't have what I would consider to be a dude right now, a war daddy type right now. Maybe Tim Keenan and some of these other guys are going to develop more into that during the upcoming season. Jaheim Otis, as I mentioned earlier. But it's a great landing spot, I think, for Jamil. I mean, given the situation, for him to be able to land at another prominent Power 5 that also has a big need at his position, as you outlined, even if we're talking about 2024, this is about as best case a scenario that I could envision for everyone involved, especially from his perspective.
And again, for people that haven't heard, I mean, just to say it, I mean, it was reported that he had an incident with a pellet gun there.
Yep.
And then also with the strength coach as well. You can look up all the details for the people that reported on that. Travis, when you heard that, is it stuff? It's essentially, and I'm sure Miami's done their due diligence, but has he had other incidents not necessarily maybe as public, but have you been hearing, is it isolated type of thing, or is it something that things he's kind of dealt with, maybe some off the field stuff throughout his time at Alabama?
Yeah, I just think maturity is what you go back to in so many of these instances. And the concern becomes, okay, this is a guy 3 years in the program and we're still talking about this. And, there have been situations with previous players. I think Christian Barmore, we talked about earlier, early in his career had those kind of issues. But then by 2020, the light went on more and he fulfilled his potential and became a high pick in the NFL draft. So I don't know if Jamil has that kind of upside as a player, but I do think if this is sort of an awakening, serves as an awakening for him from a maturity perspective, he's still got a great opportunity to hit the ceiling of whatever he's got. And I do think that ceiling is as a starter type at a Power 5 program like Miami.
Travis, and I know you've been around college football a long time, and and I say the same thing about this. Just dealing with and reporting on college athletes for a long time. Player's career goes really fast, whether it's injury, off the field type stuff, not having things properly in line to earn all the trust of the coaching staff. And all of a sudden you look up and you're about done. And that happens a lot of players for a lot of different reasons. And like you said, it could be an awakening. Hopefully, obviously from a Miami standpoint, they need a player to step in and make plays there. And they're hoping that he'll be that guy next year and moving forward. So it'll be interesting. Certainly Miami, needs to get better. They've got to add more to what they have, and we'll see how this season goes. Travis, before I appreciate you doing this. Before I let you go, though, I mean, everyone around college football is always kind of curious about Alabama, how they're doing. Maybe just kind of your thoughts heading into this season on the Crimson Tide, and maybe what they're looking at this year.
Yeah, still very talented, but as much as maybe any team since Saban's first or second team, so many questions about this team. Across the board, not just quarterback, which is where we all like to look first and foremost for obvious reasons, but defensively, they sent 3 safeties to NFL rosters from last season. So you start with the back end of that defense, and you think about the style that they're going to employ now with no Bryce Young, with no Mac Jones, and more of a run-oriented approach or run-first approach, and how the quarterback's going to play into that probably as well. Very talented up front on the offensive line and at the running back position. So more so than being quarterback centric this time around, I think they're going to be run game, running back, running quarterback centric in 2023.
Yeah, and it's certainly always interesting to see how Alabama's able to do it essentially each and every year up at the top. Obviously, from a Miami standpoint, we've seen Miami drop off. Just watching Swamp Kings, we saw the Florida run, how high they were of college football, and then certainly have dropped down since. So, Travis, I appreciate you taking the time. This is great insight. I know our viewers and everyone appreciate your insight, and this was great once again. Hopefully you enjoy the season, man, and maybe we'll talk again.
Ready or not, it's here. Let's do it.